Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. I not only bless each and every one of you for being here, but it's a pleasure to see new faces here. God bless you, and God bless all those people who watch us. It warms my heart to see all the comments, emails, and notes that we receive. It's really heartwarming to see that people study with us. And today we are going to start together study this beautiful book of Job, the book of Eov. One of the common mistakes that we pointed out in the introduction last week, and those who are not here last week, I highly recommend it for you to watch it. It's now available on YouTube. The introduction for the book of Job is the concept of God interaction with us, meaning to understand God. The whole book of Job, we explained last week, is not so much about the protagonist, is not so much about Job, but it's more about God's wisdom, to understand God or to understand God's actions in the world. The next step is just, again, to go to the key understanding of the first two chapters, is to know the big difference between us and other faith group. I assume part of us, maybe everyone, heard about those Christian preachers that preach for the prosperity, meaning you be a good Christian, you're going to prosper. And don't take me wrong, I like Joe Austin. It's a good example, the guy in Lakewood. In a sense, he is a very good healer and help people. But the big problem is, if you are like a healer, professional healer, it's awesome. If you are present as a clergy, it's a problem, because the whole theological point of religion is to understand that you don't understand, and to understand that it's not always in measure of you doing good deed. It means that it's like, I know a guy that used to come to the synagogue with a laundry list, meaning, okay, God, I sacrifice my time to watch sports, I sacrifice my time to have other fun stuff, I'm here at the synagogue, here is the list what I need. I need my stocks to go higher, I need my real estate to sell it quicker or to get my tenant, and the list goes on and on. As you all know, I assume by now, God is not really in favor of this type of interaction. It's not really works that way. So the idea is, if everything is all right and everything is good, then what's the big deal? What's the big challenge? When you have this act of faith, when things are not really in your way, and you keep faith in God, or have connection to the Creator, even you totally don't understand, or even think that it was totally wrong, that's the beauty of the book, and particularly the first several chapters. I think the common mistake that many scholars, and I'm not here to criticize anyone, just to tell you the way I feel, many scholars made, is the idea of teaching people how to handle suffering. Almost like teaching Buddhism. That, okay, if you study the book of Job, you handle suffering better. Again, I don't want you to have this false pretenses or the misunderstanding of what this book is all about. It's not about how to handle suffering, but how to be righteous despite the fact that there is phases in your life involved with suffering. Big difference. How to be faithful to the one who created you, the Almighty God, even things are not in your way. What motivates people to be righteous? That's the core idea of the book. Suffering, in that sense, in Judaism, unlike Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Shintoism, suffering is simply the way righteousness or righteous people is tested. Tested like the Lord tested Abraham. It's like the Lord tested certain biblical character. There is a big discovery in the book of Job of what is real righteousness? If I'm a real righteous person or not. And the way you can examine yourself, and in that sense, God examining you, is how you're handling suffering, even there is a total, everything is total wrong. Because if you read carefully, we explained last week, Job did everything perfectly. Everything was right. So in that sense, he was absolutely not deserved to have this type of suffering. Question like, why am I suffering? I promise you, when you finish the book, you're not going to discover an answer or instant answer, why am I suffering in part or in full of my life? But if you want to understand why am I suffering and to find out, am I truly a righteous person, here we have a chance to get to better understanding of ourselves and our relation with the Creator. In other words, does my righteousness, in the way I see myself, in the way you see yourself, is the real test of suffering? The answer is maybe or maybe not. Here is an example. About 15 years ago, I have a painful case of a mother that was fortunate to have twin boys whom I have the privilege to train for the bar mitzvahs, and she asked me in a very kind of conversational question, very in a way apparently not emotional question, Rabbi, they're going to graduate, they're going to have a bar mitzvahs, and then they need to learn how to say Kaddish, and they need to learn how to handle Yizkor, but they never met their father. How and what the proper way to handle these type of things. And after the conversation, I came home and I was thinking about people who have a pure faith in God. She's not an angry person. She didn't express any frustration of understanding why a husband involved in such a sudden accident when someone was a drunk driver, hits him and killed him. And she was pregnant with these twin boys. She never married since. And she was a kind of a happy person. The kids raised beautifully in a Jewish day school in Baltimore. And I was very impressed. But this type of question we struggle all the time. We try to explain, because the next step is have a conversation with these smart two boys. And they are twins and they're smart. And they, in a sense, they sometimes ask a different question and contradict each other. And you are in between, try to give them an adult, rational reason for, okay, we believe in God, we believe in a Creator, we believe in the world of justice. So why I didn't have a chance to see my father ever? And they ask you a question like, I'm going to see my father, I'm going to talk about my father in my speech only because what my mother told me about my father, and I saw pictures. And it's very hard to handle suffering, especially for people that you feel deep in your heart, like 1.5 million children during the Holocaust. You have no explanations. You don't try even to understand why things happen and what thing happens. So what I try, if those of you like to write things, I like to summarize with about 8 points what exactly this book is all about, and then we go over the first chapter. If you handle these 8 points clearly, and every time you have a question you look at those points first, then we have a very lively, positive and effective growing experiences together. We study this book. Number 1, this book is really not about Job. It's more about God. In other words, to understand the Creator in our way. So this book is, in a way, it's more about the omnipresent, the God, than the whole idea of understanding the protagonist, the nature of the protagonist, Job. Number 2, the concept of the divine providence and his connection to each and every creatures, and how he treated creatures in a sense of individual and caring, not transcendental, not departure from our world, but very connected to our mundane life, is another core point for this book. Number 3, very carefully listen to the language. Job has trials and tribulations. Job has trials, but he is not on trials. Is that clear? Number 3, the book is not about justice. You remember my introduction for last week. It's not about God's justice. God is not here on any form of explanation or trials. The book is more about God's wisdom than the Creator justice. Next one. The book is not about suffering. This is not Buddhism, this is not Hinduism, this is not any form of Eastern culture who try to explain to you, like the Buddha story, life is suffering, death is suffering, the whole 8 point of Buddhism. Absolutely not. The book is not about suffering. It's only to think how I be able to develop a relationship with the Creator during the time of suffering. How I can use, you can use the opportunity of suffering as a great opportunity to develop a better relationship with the one who created you. Number 6. The book is more about how to constitute righteousness than about way we are suffering. And we explain that later. The last point, number 7, the book is more about trusting than about answers. The book is more about trusting than about answers. So again, in conclusion for that phase, if you study with expectations to understand everything, then you have a false expectations. That's not the goal. Because we're going to read about a man that has everything, has a beautiful life, family, wife, children, wealth, health, everything. And just in a very short time, it's disappear. So if you want to have total expectations of understand this, you're bound to have a big disappointment. But if you understand that there is a much deeper than instant gratification of understanding certain life questions, but there's a broader understanding of God's world, then we have a very fun journey. Next phase is the authorship of the book and the time of the book. Usually, my colleagues do not like to handle these type of questions because it's a very sensitive and conflicted question. How you evaluate time, how do you evaluate authorship, how do you find the correct authenticity of certain characters. So let's understand the mindset. We are today, in 2017, almost passed through the age of books. We know author, we know books, we know what you call intellectual property, copyright. If you are back about 3,500 years ago, there is no such a thing, books, in a sense of history, to be honest with the subject. What we have the authority, can be a prophet, can be a godly figure, whatever it is the authority, the authority figure, and that entity has a scribe who carries a parchment and a quill, and he basically put in writings whatever he heard from the authority. Why it's important for us to understand this? Because here we have a total different phase in psychology. We call it the hearing dominant words, which means the whole concept of comprehension, it's not by reading a book and have the study materials like we have tonight. It's just the hearing, and that hearing dominant the moment of revelation, the moment that the prophet or the leader gives you the words. Now, why it's so important? Since we're not talking about intellectual property, copyright, or any form of authorship, then the next question is, so who wrote this book? So obviously you know the famous story, 2 Jews, 5 opinions. So obviously there are many views, such as the Talmud in Tractate Bava Batra, page 15, they tell us that Moses wrote the book of Job. They don't say if Job is a real or not, they said he wrote it. Then is another one that said that it was written during the time of Moses, during the era of the 12 spies. We're not going there why and what, just to give you the opinions, right? Then is a well-known opinion that the whole book never happened. It's only an allegory. It's called mashal. It's a view that said it never happened. One of the rabbis in the Talmud, and it's just brought to us as part of the canon, part of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible, of the Tanakh, to teach us the lesson of God's wisdom. There is another important view that it's a real character, but he is not Jewish. It's a non-Jewish character that lived in an ancient time. Now, I ask you just for fun to give a guess. Out of all these many, about 5 opinions, what the most common opinion among most of the traditional Jews? Okay, so what's the dominant opinion?
Among traditional Jews?
Yes.
We're going to say among biblical scholars, it was written much later.
Much later. Okay. I'll give you one example because I know it's coming from Jenny, so I know I have to answer that. I researched a little bit, and what I found, it was one of the absolutely leading scholar in the past generation in Israel. His name is Amos Chacham. Amos Chacham wrote who knows how many books of scholarship, and biblical study was his spiel in Israel. He was in many ways the authority, and according to Amos Chacham, in the introduction for one of his books, it's called Da'at Mikra, he held it was a real name, real person, not Jewish. He brings a beautiful source which you're welcome to read. It's in the book of Ezekiel chapter 14, and in that source they bring a list of people who are righteous, and among the list is Daniel and Job. It's one of the list of people. Heima betzidkatam yatzilu nafsham. These are the righteous people that save the world. So since Amos Chacham hold that it was written among the group of righteous people that represented by the prophet Ezekiel, it has to be a non-Jewish figure of a righteous person. Furthermore, Amos Chacham said that he was from the ancient Canaanite, the era that much early. He brings sources, I don't want to go there, but it's called Uligari's letters. It's an ancient papyrus, old letters, and he tried to say that it's a character that lived during the Abraham's time, ancient earliest time, and he said the same way as the Bereshit mentioned names like Malki Tzedek and all kind of names. One of them is the ancient world-renowned non-Jewish person that believed in monotheism like Abraham, and his name is Job, and it's development of his character accordingly. So again, if you go to Cassuto, which is a biblical critics, and you go to others, he's hold the same thing, that is an ancient story about non-Jewish character that develop later on as a figure that applies not only, as we know, the Old Testament, but others take it very seriously, the study of the book of Job. So, in short, what I try to tell you is there are many views. Personally, I kind of more comfortable with Amos Chacham and Cassuto and others, Malbim and other traditional views, that it was a real character, non-Jewish real character, that portrayed a story that relates to us. But as we said in the introduction, for our discussion, the protagonist is not the key, because what happened to him personally, how truth is, and what exactly happened, that's not our discussion. Our discussion is way above that. So now we're going to the text itself, and in that sense we put the date, Jenny, and the authorship total aside, and we understand that the book is wisdom teaching, and that's it. And we go for the first pasuk. I'm using this translation the very best. It's not always the best, but that's the way. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name is Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. So, to understand that concept is, number one, we understand that he is a great man. Right? Gdulat Eov, how great he was. But also the Malbim and other explains that the whole goal is we need, toward learning of Job, understand God. What does that mean? What did God expecting me to do in a certain way? Because he is on trial, soon you see how. But the way that he is on trial is not in the language that we are thinking, that he is on trial, meaning that God is testing him. No, he has certain trials. And what happened here, they want to tell us that he lived in the land of Uz. Land of Uz, what is land of Uz? Obviously, it's not part of the Jewish faith. It's land of Uz. If you look at the book of Bereshit, the Genesis chapter 10, they tell us that Uz ben Aram, or Uz ben Nachor. So it's basically a location that it's in the northern Israel, going to Syria. It's a place called Bashan, or Eretz Kedem. So most of the scholars say that it was among the Aramean tribes, eastern part of Israel. So what I try to convey to you is not Jewish, by any means. Now, he was, what they said, he lived, he was blameless and upright, he feared God and shunned evil. So apparently, if you just read it, you think this man is absolutely great man. The answer is no. So can someone try to tell me, if you have this language, blameless, upright, fear God, shun evil, what's wrong? What's wrong with him? Why is it problematic? So the great Rambam tells us, a person always should examine, and soon you see how beautifully it's go with the lines. What did God expecting me to do at this very moment? Meaning, God granted each and every one of us with something special, because we are all created in our language, in the hand of the Lord. God have us in the palm of His hand, and that's the way we created. The question is, what we are doing with that. The problem we have here, soon you see, by saying, I'm a good man, I don't bother anybody, I don't do any wrong, it's not sufficient to justify the person's existence. Meaning, in our language, we have to examine ourselves. We're getting close to Rosh Hashanah. We have to examine ourselves in a relationship of God, why God put me here, and what exactly God expecting me to do at this moment. Why the Rambam goes this way? Because you read the next line, they said, he has 7 sons, and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. Very descriptive of wealth, right? And has a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes, on their birthdays, and they will invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job will make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he will sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned, and curse God in their hearts. This was Job's regular customs. Now think not just the Rambam, think in general. What is the problem? The way we understand so far. What's the problem? If we try to do some type of biblical juxtaposition, which means if we try to compare the character of Noah and the character of Abraham to the character of Job, and we ask ourselves, they are all righteous people, yet in our prayer book we said, Baruch atah Hashem Magen Avraham, right? Blessed are you God, shield of Abraham. Why not shield of Job? Why not shield of Noah? What makes Abraham way better than they are? The answer is, if you read carefully the text, there is a problem, the Rambam tells us. He was a good person in the sense he didn't do any bad. He's not stealing anything from everyone. He's an honest person. But he is not volunteer to do kindness to other people. He is not schlepping bags in his trunk, giving charity to other people. He is not making those parties and invited the indigent to partake of his celebrations. I'm using that just as an example. You know that I'm connected to the Hasidic world. I came from the Hasidic sect. If you go to any Hasidic sect, I'm using just example, the Bells, the Square, the Vishnitz, the big name Tzanz, when they have a big chasana, a big wedding, they always have line of tables for people who cannot afford, for indigent. They eat at the weddings. The Rebbe always have a rules. Sometimes hundreds of them eat at the weddings. Now we read here about, in our modern days, a billionaire, right? Guy who was a very wealthy. But we now examining him in a little different way. God put you in a certain position, so God has certain expectation. By telling me that you are a nice man, an honest businessman, or a nice person, that's not sufficient. In our language, God is saying that's not enough to justify what you have. You have to do something more to have this type of life. Not that, again, don't take it as a total interaction that if you do everything right, then God's going to grant you prosperity. You have to be careful with that language. That's a dangerous way of thinking. But the way that the Rambam tells us, he said, if we exempt his behavior, it's if you take the text of Abraham and you read in the Ethics of the Fathers, the 10 trials and tribulations that Abraham and Sarah went through, and you compare it to Noah, or you compare it to Job. So the problem with Noah, he was a righteous man, but he didn't bother with everyone else, all these criminals around him. He just built his ark. Job was a good man, but look what happened. They make his sons hold a feast in their homes. Imagine, they have these big mansions in our days. They have these big parties, they have the big birthdays, the big feasts. And as you know, the way the Creator created the world, there are many poor people out there, it's no doubt, right? But nothing there. They will invite whom they invite to their parties. The 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. It's nice family gathering, and they constantly have different parties and different members of the family. That's beautiful, but that's not a role model. That's not someone that should show that I'm connected to God. If you remember in the introduction, we said one of the kind of trials, or one of the way that we examine ourselves, is to see our pattern of faith, our pattern of behavior in both ways, when we have everything we wish or when we have nothing. And if you remember the way we concluded last week, I share with you a story about Professor Leibovitz, you remember that? And how basically he reacted to one of the students, and he said, if things turn around the other way, you still bless God. You still say the same thing, that you are now thanking God so much. You know, in Israeli culture, you see sometimes the Israeli football players, they run to the kotel and they thanking God when they win the game. And my comments was always, how come they don't do that when they lose the game? Right? The whole idea of, okay, I have God, you are my friend when you let me win. But when it's not, it's a different story. That's the problem. That's the core of the problem that we need to talk. Now if you go further on, the next thing, because soon we're going to finish this chapter, this is a short chapter, and obviously there is way more. To those of you who can read the Hebrew or the English translation of the Malbim, it's one of the best. But anyway, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. So there are several points I would like to share with you before we go there. Number one is the idea that from sentence 1 to sentence 5, we are basically in our world, in our mundane language, in our human language. And this is a word that I would like you to remember. We talked about it in the past. It's called anthropomorphism. What is an anthropomorphism? It's basically a Greek word that expresses human language. Dibra Torah bilshon bnei Adam. The Torah speaks, the text speaks in a human language. In order for us to comprehend something so high, as a supernatural power, we need to use anthropomorphism. We need to use a language that the Torah said God anger, God ears, God fire, God, as expression of human doesn't mean that it's a human, the hand of the Lord, right? It's just human expressions of God. So from 1 to 6 is like human expressions. This is a man, this is the protagonist, he is wealthy, he has his servants, he has a big home, he has a parties, he has a good life, right? But as the Maharal explained, he wasn't partner with God. In that sense, God is in a search of man. God is in a search of partnership in the world. In a sense, in our language, it's almost like saying God needs our partnerships. It's like, I created you to be my partner to develop the world and make it a better place to live. What are you doing with that? That's the teaching of the Soloveitchik, of the Maharal, all this, the idea that we are partnered with God. So man is in search of God and God is in search of man in a sense of collaboration, of improving the world, right? So therefore, okay, so you're bringing a burnt offering. But what did he say? What's the reason he said? Look at the quote. He said on sentence 5, he says, oh, you bring offering, perhaps my children have sinned and curse God in their hearts. So what the way Eov, what the way Job conceptualized the problem? He said, maybe I need to bring the Lord a burnt offering to please God, like Isaiah said, God really needs that, right? That you're pleasing God by bringing this sacrificial offering. And it's because you're afraid that your children are too arrogant, which we know if children are born to a house of billionaires, most probably they are arrogant, right? So the whole idea is, his concern is not that they are bad kids or do anything wrong, but maybe they are arrogant. So therefore, I guess what? I'm taking those animals and I'm going to bring them a sacrificial offering to God. So in that way, I make peace with God and everything's going to be lovely, right? And obviously, this creates its own set of problems. What's the problem? You should take care of the poor, they should take care of the people in need, they should look at the community, they should do a chesed, a kindness work, they should do other things. you're taking those animals and you think this way you're going to please God and make peace with Him, because you realize that by living this type of life, you know, they always said in the Bible that life is like pyramids, you know, you ups and downs, and there are moments that you are low and moments that you are very high. One time I remember, just as a good example, I have a fellow came from Israel and tried to make money in real estate. And he makes money and then he starts losing money. So he came the other guy and he said to him, how come real estate making money? So I came in and said to him in Hebrew in those years, I said, business is business. There are moments you're making fortune, the other moments you're losing your pants. That's the way business are, that's the way life is. So you're on the top of a pyramid, you have all these goodies, what are you doing with that? You're going to take sacrificial offering because you kids just getting fat and take care of each other, and maybe he used the language, maybe they curse God in their hearts. What does that mean, they curse God? Maybe they behave as arrogant, as condescending, as feel okay, we born with the silver spoon and we have all these goodies, so we feel that we are superior above other kids, all right? It's a problem. I have one of my closest friends, again Israeli guy, that he gets a job in one of those fancy private schools, and he have no clue of American culture and American life, and he was teaching Hebrew. This go back many years ago. So one time was a girl that used to come with a stretch limo to the school. The parents, one is in China, one is and she used to come with a assistant, and he was furious because she put her legs on the table, a 9th grade girl. So he said, you cannot come to my class like this. He disciplined her. Sure enough, they have a parents-teacher meeting, and the principal gave him a little piece of paper saying, you should conduct yourself when you're talking to a parents. The father is the chairman of the board, and you're going to speak to the mother, you have to be careful. And he said, he walked to the principal, he says, you expect me to lie? Well, what exactly are they saying? She's a rotten child, an arrogant, rotten child, and I'm going to go to the mother and lie to her and tell her how great your child is and how wonderful it is just because they sponsor the school? Anyway, the reality is what? No, I have a long conversation, and he was soft and he laughed with the mother. He says, you have a great girl, but anyway, he didn't want to continue anyway. But my point is, this is a reality. You think that this is ancient literature. We say that this text is divine, and as you know, millions or maybe hundreds of million Christians believe that it's divine. It's because you see the application to our life. It's not just the ancient protagonist, it's a reality. So from sentence 6 and onward, we go to a different level, which is, okay, so far we talk in human language. Now let's switch gear and talk about heaven. Now we're going to heaven and see what's going on there, okay? Almost like interaction between the physical and the metaphysical world. So in sentence 6, it's written again in anthropomorphic, in human language. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. So you see here one of the common mistakes. What is a Satan? In our language, Satan is something very bad. It's like the angel of death, the evil inclination. In the Zoharic literature, they call it Sitra Achra, that the horrible side. The one thing we forget, that he's one of God's ministers that have a certain jobs to do, and God created him, or that entity. And therefore you see here in a human conversation, again, for us to understand the heavenly spheres, is almost like portraying a human discussion between entities. So it's like the angels talks and the Satan talk, and the Lord responds, and they have back and forth between them. And what's the conversation? The conversation is saying, in a way, okay, this guy is a good guy, he's blameless, and the Satan's going to say, wait a second, you are really, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hand. so that his flocks and herd are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So all of a sudden what Satan in that sense is not such a bad guy. The Satan is just in a sense an emissary, an agent of God. What? Oh yeah, right. Spy in a sense, he wants to discover the real you, the real Job. The real you meaning you are doing all of that, you're bringing sacrificial offering, you make all these things, you're blessing God, you're doing all of that. But let's see what you do if things are different. And the Lord said to Satan, very well, then everything he has is in your power, but not the man himself, do not lay a finger. So what do you see here? Number one, it's not because Job committed a sin. You can argue and you can say that he didn't do what extraordinary person should do, which is sharing his wealth, doing things for the community. But it's not going to be a punishment for wrongdoing. It is a specific trial. He's not on trial, but it's a trial to discover, like God tested Abraham, right? He wants Abraham to discover himself. How faithful is he to God? He was also, Job need to discover, meaning you and I, every one of us, need to discover ourselves toward different phases of our lives. So therefore, he left him, and the rest you can read by yourself. But the good news is, at this chapter and the next chapter, he still have faith in God. So in that sense, the Satan asked a question. I try to use a human, common modern days language. The Satan come and said, if you went to Auschwitz and you have 2 numbers on your hands and you still daven, right? And you still put talis and tefillin, or you still come to shul and pray to God and believe in God, then you pass the test. Then you are a real righteous person. That's the idea. Not in that, the argument between Satan and God is the idea, okay, you give him everything, you have an easy life, you have all these servants, you have all these goods, but that's not what it's all about, that's not what life is all about. So, like the famous story of Anatoly Sharansky, the famous Zionist prisoners, that when the KGB put him under severe trial and tribulation, he said to them, look, you can take everything, but you cannot take the faith, the spirit from me. Even you put me in jail and send me to Siberia, you cannot take away my faith. This is something you cannot, my spirit, you cannot, it cannot. So all this idea of suffering is bringing a person to a very good part of himself, which is you understand that there is a time to do a self-search. There's a time to do inventory. But even you do that, and you are Job, meaning you come to conclusions, soon you see, with all the dialogue with his friends, that I don't deserve this. Here is the very big deal. Are you going to rebel against the one who created you? Or, like Moses said, En emunah el emunah ve'en avel, that the first chapters show us that Job, even he was not on trial, but he passed the trial. Meaning, the first chapter proved that he still kept the faith in God, even he lost so much. If you read, we don't have time, but if you read, it's very sad how things turn sour and he starts losing and losing and losing, but he still give a blessing to God. Those of us who have the advanced Sidurim, you see at the end of the morning service the 13 principles of the Maimonides. So one of them is the Ani Ma'amin, I believe with complete faith, that God knows everything, past, present, and future, and involved not only over there, Bashamayim Imal, transcendental, but God is also inside. In a little Zoharic literature, there is a book, some said 2nd century, it's called Sefer HaBahir. So in that literature, he tried to describe they call it mesובב כל עלמין, the God that is around the globe, and ממלא כל עלמין, that God is involved within the world. So that means, not God forbid that there are two God, it's one God, but God has a duality, has a two phases, which is one around and one involved in every daily mundane thing. So with that understanding, we know that the reason for that, it's because we call it in our literature Neoplatonic thinking. Neoplatonic thinking meaning God is not just over there, God cares of things that happen here. And it's a strong correlation, in conclusion of the first chapter, between the heavenly world and the earthly world. It's almost like when we finish the Kaddish, we go 3 steps backward, right? And we said, Ose Shalom Bimromav, may God who make peace in heaven, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. So what does that mean? God will make peace in heaven. So in the Zoharic and the Kabbalistic literature, they explains that there is a ministering angels, if I said it in the very best, above there. And when you see crisis in the world, earthquake, tsunami, whatever it is, it's a reflection of what happened above, which means that there is a strong correlation between our lives here and the life of the heavenly entities, the spirits, the souls, those who came before us. As by the way, many other faith groups believe in that. Confucianism, for example, strongly believe in that. The Chinese, many others, they believe the more advanced person in life, the more wise he or she, and the moment they departure from this world, they get that understanding of life way better than the living who was just temporarily on the body on this world. So what you see so far in the first chapter, what we learn first and foremost is the idea that the book is basically about faith. The book is about faith in the Ashgacha Pratit, in divine providence over even small things in life. Unlike Thomas Aquinas and others that say that yes, we believe that God created the world, but God departed from this world the moment He created and is not anymore involved with the world. We, in a traditional Judaism, believe in a Neoplatonic belief, which is believe in the pantheism. Pantheism meaning God is here, cares for every small thing that happens to us. So therefore, when a person have challenges in his or her life, here is the greatest moment to elevate yourself to the highest level. Meaning, in order for a person to be close or closest to his soul or to closest to God, he or she needs to understand that those challenges are for good. In a sense, it brings you close to the ultimate goal, which is being connected and servant of the ultimate purpose of life with God. I would like to just conclude with several points before I take your questions, which is the 7 points I emphasized before, and I want to go over them in a quick way just to see how it's a reflect to the first chapter. We said that obviously the book is about divine providence, and we said that this book is more about God than about Job. The whole idea of Job is trials, but he's not on trials. The book is more about God, wisdom, than about justice. The book is not about suffering, but how to develop relationship towards suffering. So it's more about trusting God. It's more about believing in God than answers my question, why certain things happen to me. It's more how to discover how righteous you are, or different gradation, different level of your righteousness toward suffering. So in that sense, obviously it's a lot of wisdom. Obviously it's a lot of understanding, and there are many who go even deeper with this. But I think we just get the overview of the first chapter, and it's a time for you to ask questions.